to do that. There are that's very, very, very important. We have to look at gear ratios. So when you have a narrow power band, there's ways to do it, but you have got to be, you cannot be overtired. You cannot have your suspension way, way off, and you've got to have your gear splits proper. You also have to have your starting line ratio proper so that your clutch is where it needs to be. That's very easy to do. But keep in mind, that's where stock eliminator cars or things along those lines become a lot more challenging, let's say, for maximum performance. Obviously, we got some guys that run stock eliminator that can take it out with, even super gas, like our boy, Timmy Nicholson up there, up in, the upper Kansas, Nebraska area, kicks their butt in super gas and shouldn't be able to be done, and the reason is it has to do with maximizing the performance of your combination. That's very much harder to do whenever your horsepower weight is not as optimal. So the less horsepower, the more weight you got. But it just means that, you're not going to ever make that pretty race pack run like somebody's making 1,000 horsepower in a 2,800 pound car. But at the same time, it's all about maximizing your combination. So racing the guy in the other lane doesn't matter. It's about getting the maximized performance out of your combination. And in doing so, the best way to put it, it's kind of like Bob Glidden told me when I was a kid. As long as you follow the guy, or you copy what the guy in first place is doing, you'll always be in second. So don't always do what everybody else is doing or listen, ask everybody else. The best way to put it is give your car what it needs and go from there. Let's see here. Andy Gestis, sorry. How is launch RPM related to max torque RPM? So this is kind of interesting. So most people don't really know when they see a dyno sheet how horsepower is calculated. So if you multiply your torque at any given RPM, so you multiply torque times the RPM that made it at, you'll get a number. If you divide that by 2828, actually, sorry, 5252, I don't know why I said that. I'm going to get dyslexic. But by 5252, you actually get your calculation for horsepower. So, as your horsepower falls, as your torque falls off, but your horsepower power increases, the reason for it is it has to do with the multiplication factor of RPM. So basically, if you really kind of like think it down into Dummyville of, basically a Newton type thing, and the apple falling, what it basically comes down to is it's the inertia of the engine is what's helping you make that. It's that actual rotation factor is what's helping you. So that's why a lot of it years ago, the 500-inch race to RPM was a advantage. It wasn't necessarily that it made that much more power, is because they could utilize that, contained amount of rotational mass. So Ed Carpenter's talking. Ed's basically been running a lot. He's run a lot of super stock stuff for a long time. He had a Chevy 2, just sold. Now he's building a Cobalt. And he's asking, the biggest learning curve from going from a super stock Chevy 2 with our 10-inch next gen to a comp eliminator Cobalt. So, what we're looking at is what he's going to do. So RPM makes a big difference. There's not going to be that much of a difference. It's going to depend on what clutch we technically, choose and how we want to do that. Because obviously picking all that, the ratio, all the ratios, looking at the clutch, the friction coefficient, the applied pressure is going to make a difference. The big thing is if he goes down to goes to pro billet style clutches versus a long style, a lot of times, believe it or not, a long style is not, multiple disc is not always an advantage. There's a lot of times there's not a reason. I can't tell you how many of our guys that have run classes like that, anything between a stock to a comp car, I've taken them back to single disc clutches and they perform better. And it really just has to do with, a lot of times it's better to have that single friction coefficient than it is to have all that extra friction coefficient stacked on top of each other. You're adding variables. Anytime you can take away variables, the better it'll be. So really the only time to add multiple discs for the most part, and there are exceptions to this, but is the only time to really add multiple discs is when you actually physically cannot hold the horsepower with the less discs. That's just kind of a rule of thumb. So most of the time, don't think that hey, I've got a single disc clutch running with 800 horsepower, turning this thing 8,000 RPM, that by switching over to a twin 7-inch is going to make you quicker. Because technically on a car like that, twin 7-inch would be more than what you actually need. So you'd be having to run a lot less a lot less applied pressure, which takes your tuning window and really shrinks it down. So that's obviously not what we want to be at. Let's see here. Pat Clement. Okay. Is engine RPM and drive shaft RPM enough to tune a clutch? Yes, for sure. But there are some tricks. So I tell you what, Pat, good for a question. Let's take 1 second here. And I want to go ahead and share that race pack graph again on this. And what I want you guys to take a look at. Okay. And what we want to look at here is, let's see here, drive shaft RPM. So let's take away the clutch RPM. Let's take away the shock information. Let's just look at what Pat would actually be talking about here. So, most of these cars, and actually, you know what? I've got a really good idea here for everybody. Let's see, actually, let me close back out this and let's get some example stuff. We gave a shout out a little while ago to, let's see here, Matt Walter, and we're going to share one of Matt Walter's graphs. So hope he doesn't shoot me for this, but it might be a pretty good opportunity because I can actually show everybody how to zero this graph. We're going to walk this thing all the way over here using the red arrow till we see launch RPM in our run. The interesting thing is Matt does not have clutch RPM on this particular run. This is when he was just starting out. So he was pretty green on this and he did really good with it. So that being said, here's what's going to be interesting. This is how we can start looking at figuring out when did this clutch lock up and what was it doing. All right. So if everybody can actually see this, well, I'm actually going to give you a better color because I know red on the live feed is probably not the best. So we'll go green with both. What you can actually see, let's zero this run actually to begin with. So we'll click over here and we're going to slide this over. And so you see this drive shaft RPM. Take a spike. Okay, there it did. We're going to back up one and we're going to zero this. So our zero, so when he launches the car, you actually see this RPM. See this nice little round spot right where my cursor is, which is right in here. This little round spot, that's right about where that clutch is going to be locking up. Now, to basically solidify what I'm thinking there, I'm going to pull up the Excel Gs. The Excel Gs, right there, you see that thing where it spikes and it takes a downturn. That spot right there is when that clutch came 1-to-1 on this particular. So I'm not going to get within exactly 100 RPM. I can get close. Having clutch RPM is very, very important. It does help a lot, but at the same time, we can get there. We can get close enough to tune where we need to. So in his clutch, for example, we can tell it locked up at about 7,200 RPM. Here's what I would look at personally. I would come over here and look in his gear shift. And he's hitting the shifts really good, really clean. I mean, they're pretty even all the way across the top. So he shifted and it fell down to 7,600. Optimally, that tells me we probably would have liked to have slipped his clutch just a little longer. I'd rather slipped it up to about 74, 7,500. Now, some of you may be doing the math in your head and say, well, if it slipped to 7,400 and he only dropped to 76, it won't separate. Not always true. When it drops, sometimes the engine lugging like that or dropping actually gets a run at it. When it gets a run at it, it'll knock the clutch out just a little bitty bit. So adjusting those gear splits is very important. That's why with a pro stock car, we change these gear splits round to round to round is to sometimes open them up, tighten them up, what we need to do. But obviously that's not possible for most. But to give you an idea, that's the best way to answer that question for Pat. So yes, we can do that. And there's some certain things to look at. But by seeing these sensors, we can actually tell that. We can also tell how sharp the bottom of this is. The bottom of that gear change is pretty sharp. If it's not sharp, you would look at like my pro stock ones, which were very, very curved. The bottom of it looks more like a trough than the bottom of a mountain, so to speak. So that's something you really need to look at there. Let's see here. Aaron Puff, which is our Awareness Motorsports boy up there in Michigan. He runs, like I say, I know with a lot of the guys up there, and I think he makes every once in a while makes some treks down to play with the Ozark Mountain Super Shifters. And he says, any thoughts on cooling the clutch between rounds in bracket style racing with quick turnaround times? Okay, so this is a really good opportunity to talk about heat dissipation. Heat dissipation, the worst enemy of a clutch, period, bar none, is heat. So it not only does it affect the longevity, it affects the flatness, it affects all that, but it also really plays a very big key into consistency. Consistency is, so yes, cooling it between rounds, good idea. I do know your combination well enough, Aaron, to know that, hey, this thing's going to be tough for us to get the slippage that we want just based off the horsepower weight, what we're looking at. Basically, for everybody out there listening, it's a lower horsepower car with the weight that it's at, but it's geared fairly optimally for what it is. The trick with it's going to be is most of its slipping is going to come on the starting line. We're not going to have a lot of gear slippage in the gear changes just because there's not really a good way to do that with that horsepower to weight for what it is. So theoretically, what I usually advise for somebody to do is, if you have the ability, the easy thing to do is have a leaf blower. If you got your inspection window, stick the leaf blower in there between rounds. If it's a quick turnaround, if it's literally like hot lapping, like you're coming back, sitting in staging lanes for 3 minutes, go again, obviously not an option. But what I would usually tell you is most clutches tend to get just slightly more aggressive. if you think it's, and you can play with this a little bit when you're out testing or in rounds that qualifying, play with it a little bit. Try lowering and raising your launch RPM or playing with possibly tire pressure just a little bit, knowing that if, let's say, just launch RPM, if you know the clutch is going to be just a little more aggressive, maybe 100 RPM down would be all you need to make that change just a little bit, so that clutch is just a little less aggressive on the hit, you're making up for it. So there's different ways to do that, but definitely cooling them down is always a good thing. And a lot of guys will do the extra little thing. Go ahead and make the, basically a dummy rod. You make something that you prop the clutch pedal wide open with when you put the cooler in there. That really helps you. That's just circulating that air, all the way around the clutch disc, the pressure plate, everything. But back to the heat dissipation before I go off this subject. In the Pro Series stuff, I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of titanium. Yes, it's great for super high RPM stuff and longevity. The problem is it's a heat sink. The billet clutches, the Pro billet stuff, the cost of producing, say, just the cover, not the whole cover, simply just the cover piece itself or the pressure plate itself, is anywhere between 3 and 8 times the cost of the aluminum piece. That's kind of why we go away from coatings. I know some of the 500-inch guys still play with it. It's usually not advantageous. It's not going to be good on your wallet long term, and the turnaround of it's not that good. So if you're going to slip a clutch to do enough to do any good, coatings aren't your way to go. Titanium is a heat sink. Yes, it works great for strength, but it's not good for longevity. It's definitely a consistency issue, especially for anybody that might be ever having to do something quick on turnarounds. That's never good. Louis Sylvester, which is one of our NMRA guys, he likes to play with that. Basically, he's our fellow Ford racer. Likes to play with the very challenging stick, low horsepower stuff, which is like I say, that's a lot of fun. What's the most counterweight levers can take? So, trick question. And I'm sure knowing Sylvester, he knows this. He's used to doing stuff which is with the diaphragm-based counterweighted levers, and those are a little different. Those really, you can't put very much to the diaphragm the way it currently is set up without getting into a point in which if you use the clutch to shift, that becomes an issue. Because you can overcenter the diaphragm, things like that. That being said, though, you can still get pretty substantial. We've tested with some stuff, and this is an applied pressure amount. So, for example, on a long style clutch, I mean, literally, it's as much as you can physically hang out there, not horseshoe the damn bolt. But that's also why we make different levers. So, it's not a one. Obviously, we have a lever that's pretty much standard, but we can pretty much get everybody where we need to. But in the Pro billet world, we make different levers. Like, for example, in the Pro Stock ranks, I know in some of the 6 1/4 stuff, the 6-inch, 6.6 stuff we made for the 500-inch guys, the Aussie stuff, we've made different levers for literally every different engine combination. So we move it around. So, but here's the point. If you get to the point which you're running, it's the same thing as where you get too low on counterweight. You can just as easily get too high on counterweight. So what it boils down to, all of a sudden your window can be too small, but you can also have it where it's like you're having to make a 20-gram change to make a difference. So you don't want to get there. If you get to the point which so much counterweight is hanging out there to get the job done, it probably means there's something wrong with the rest of the combination. If you're having to run a lot of counterweight, it tells me you have an engine RPM issue. You don't have you got way too much load on the clutch, which means probably not enough ratio. Too big of a tire, things along those lines. There's a reason we're ripping it out, or maybe it's just the wrong clutch selection. Maybe we need to do a different clutch. There's a lot of things to look at there, but that's why we look at everything as a whole. Frank Riaz asked another one is normally how much, or I say is asking how long does one of these clutches type of clutches last? So different styles. So a lot of I'm going to give you guys some different examples. I'm going to give a shout out to Yandro. Everybody's really familiar with this TT Minion car, which is literally you got to give him hellacious props for it, because one of the things that's been the most important to him is it's actually a street car, and the guy does take it out and drive it. It's pretty crazy that, drive it anywhere you want to go rip off a 740 and go down and get you a milkshake next door. But he's probably, I would say he's probably one of the harder guys on some of our stuff. Yandro's tested everything from our older 3-lever stamp steel style, which he's been 750s, I believe. He can correct me if I'm wrong on that clutch, versus our 6-lever 11 or aluminum cover style next gen type thing. Yandro's usually, I think, getting somewhere, and he could push those things to probably 80 to 100 runs, give or take, and he puts quite a bit of street use on it. And most of our stock eliminator bracket racers, Guys are just track only. If it's a single 10-inch, 10.5, something like that, it just depends. But usually, if you are getting more than say 100 to 120 runs out of a clutch before we're servicing it, it's not me trying. It's not any of us trying to get in your pocketbook. It just boils down to you're leaving more. You're leaving a lot of performance on the track because we're not slipping the clutch very much. So that's the important thing to look at. So that's probably the most important thing for everybody to look at. Is it's not necessarily how long they last. We can obviously make them last longer by just upping the pressure or friction coefficient, not putting the load on the clutch, but it leaves the performance on the table. So optimally, most of my guys now, if you're making 450, 500 horsepower in a 3,000-pound car, you're probably going to get a lot more runs out of a clutch than the guy making 800 or 1,000, horsepower in the same weight car doing the same thing. You're probably going to get 30, you'd say 20 to 30% more longevity out of that same between rebuilds. One thing I do want to touch on real quick is I had a customer call me today and I had another one call me yesterday talking about just getting a clutch disc but not servicing the clutch. Big no, not to spend money. It just has to do with you're actually going to hurt yourself doing this. Anytime we're going to put a new clutch, once the clutch disc is thin, it's too thin, it's time to regrind or heat shields. That's why they're segments, by the way. The segments, we usually grind them 2 or 3 times or maybe more before we replace the segments versus the ones that are rivet on. We usually replace those heat shields almost every time. And that's just because they pull, they cup, they warp from the different metals expanding and contracting at different rates. But the point of it is if you take a new disc on an old run surface, the old run surface will basically cut your disc to the same pattern really quickly and it won't wear flat like it should. So anytime you put a new disc in it, it's very, very, important. So I was just corrected. Yandro said he's been 740s with, as he calls, the dinosaur clutch. So congrats. Sorry. I for some reason was thinking that one hadn't been 40s yet, but that's a good thing. So that's basically, that's like I said, some of the questions we got so far. If anybody wants to get us any more, we can. Like I say, I want to take a second here, and I'm going to bring up a program that we've made. And in doing so, what I want to do here is show you guys how you can actually figure out what kind of pressure you have. And we make these with different programs for different clutches and things like that. So let's see here. Give me 1 second, everybody, and I will get you right up here so you can see everything. I got our producer in my ear saying, take a breath. And everybody doesn't. Everybody who's ever talked to me on the phone knows I talk like this all the time. They usually are just like trying to get a question in edgewise. So, that's just part of it. So let's see here. Let's see. We're going to pull in the next gen program. This is just an example. And let's see here. Let's go with this one. Give me just a minute. We'll let this pop up. And what we're going to show you is we've actually made these. We have them for all the different ones, and we can customize them any which way we want to. But it allows somebody, so if you want to be able to quickly look and see what you have for pressure-wise, this allows you to do it. So let's see here. We'll look at these later. Okie dokie. And what we're looking at down here, so what we're able to do is we can actually go in here and adjust this. And if I say my starting line RPM is 5,000 RPM, and I want lock up at 6,700, we can go over here and we can actually use the slider or whatever we want to do. But basically, let's say we take the slider, we're going to run this all the way down here to, let's say about 2.5 turns of base pressure. So what that does is it just goes ahead and puts it in there and says, okay, 2.5 turns of base pressure is going to get us 542 pounds at that point. So then we're going to say, okay, at our counterweight, how much counterweight? So let's say we've got 36 grams of counterweight. Let's see. Of course, it doesn't want to. Oh, I forgot. I apologize to everybody. We got this program in a different place where we can't do that. So we use 27 for now, but it still makes the point. So what we have to look at is what that tells us at 5,000 RPM, it calculates it for us. And it says we had 896 pounds of pressure at 5,000 RPM with 2.5 turns and 27 grams. We can walk over here. We say, okay, at 6,700, we had 1,400 pounds of pressure. We can actually change that RPM up there with an unlocked sheet. I just want to give you guys a better idea of what we're trying to look at. But we have these programs where you can play with it and put everything you want. We can get it for each clutch. Usually speaking, I really encourage people to do it themselves off of the sheets and keep a data book. For an example, and I'm more than happy. We're in the middle of updating some of our website stuff currently. But what I want to show everyone here is we actually have run sheets. This is how I recommend all you guys do run sheets. Basically, we want to have, let's see if we can find you guys an exact one. What's here? And this is an example of, this is going to be an example of one of our run sheets that we would use. So it has a lot more information than most of you guys are going to need to do. But what we do is we print, a lot of people can go get the JEGS, the Summit book, whatever, the log book. We've got notebooks and notebooks from every run. That's what makes, information is very important. So what I want you guys to keep in mind is what we do is we print off all these. So if we're going to make we think we're going to make 100 runs in a year, we print off 100 of these things off the copier. We 3-ring, hole punch them, throw them in a binder, and there we go. Every run, when you get back, we staple the time slip to that piece of paper. And then what it allows us to do is go down here and we can say, hey, this is what transmission information we had. This is what clutch we had in it. And we can even break down, what your gear drops were. If that stuff's not necessarily that important, but basically looking at all the details. So if we know, especially if you're data logging, it's a really good idea to always know, what did you have in that car? What changes did you make? Keep track of that. It's very, very, very important to do so. So that's why I say that it's very important for me a lot of times for my customers to take the actual sheets rather than using the program I just showed everyone, because you actually take a minute to run a calculator, write it down, and it actually said, you multiply it out yourself. You kind of get a better idea. It sticks with you a lot more as far as what you're changing. So some of the questions we had before, how much does a big counterweight change? That's going to tell you your combination. What did 3 grams do for me? What 6 grams do for me? That gives you a lot better scenario on what to do. We have a lot of these different forms that we look at. This is something at any given time, my customers, we're getting ready to upload these all back. But just, for example, a scale sheet. So we're always going to look at, what your front, right, left, what your biases are, because obviously that makes a big difference as far as how much pressure applies to, to the rear tires, or what load you're putting on the clutch. So there's a lot of these different things that we look at to basically, get everybody honed in where they need to be. So, but at the end of the day, basically all we're getting back to here is everything we're talking about is balancing the whole, I guess, structure of this conversation was applied pressure with friction coefficient, the load you're putting on the clutch, and understanding what you're doing with it. That's the most important thing. So a lot of times somebody, a lot of guys I can't tell you, guys are new to this. They say, well, I don't have to be in the bell housing adjusting it all the time. Well, it's kind of like, okay, we can do that, but you're going to stay locked up. But the funniest part about it is I would probably say it's 9 times out of 10 is not accurate enough. 99 times out of 100 might be. Guys get them and they figure out that sliding underneath the car or on top of it, I guess depending on where your bell hole is in your bell housing, it's not that hard to make the adjustments. And all of a sudden, you figure out I can make a little adjustment here and I can make a little adjustment there and I can go a lot quicker. And that's very important to most, because let's face it, most of us did not get into the sport of drag racing to do the same thing every time. I mean, I guess that is the point of bracket racing, but at the same time, the point of it is usually if you got a little bit of vinegar in you, you're pushing on the steering wheel to go faster, no matter how fast you're going. I can tell you right now from my own stuff, from running a small tire NA car running 870s to running a mountain motor pro stock car going 620s, it doesn't matter. You're pushing on the steering wheel at the other end of the racetrack trying to go quicker. But back to the whole thing, this all really goes back to consistency. So keeping notes, that helps with your consistency. Doing the same thing every race, that helps with your consistency. The other thing I probably want to take a second to say is, don't be afraid of trying new things. Just remember how to get back to where you were. A lot of these guys have been, for so many years, I've taught, getting away from tuning with nothing but base pressure and really using the counterweight. And to me, that's very, very, very important. So, you've got to, if you're going to tune with all base pressure, put a diaphragm in it, put a Morgenbeck in it, put something that just the thing I've never understood with a lot of these clutch companies. If you're going to sell a counterweighted clutch, for the love of God, use counterweight. There's a reason that pro stock cars, pro mod cars, which I'm going to side with my boy Tim on this one. The pro mod guys that still know how to use their left foot, that literally don't just buy a ride with, a program that says, hey, take me A to B and stroke my checkbook. Give these pro stock guys a little bit of credit. But look at it. Look at what we use to do what we're doing. That's how we stay consistent. It's being able to control that slippage of the clutch. And we do that through the use of gear ratio splits, through the use of suspension, shocks, 4-link, ladder bar, whatever it may be, however you're setting up, the controlling the body of the car. You have to understand it all comes down to it. Real quick, we got another question here from Rich Guido. Rich has actually got a very, very interesting, he runs the Rocky Mountain Drag Week and some other stuff, very interesting combination, high horsepower Pontiac. Oh God, that almost hurt. Sorry, no, I'm just joking. Basically, he says curious about starting point for a car. About 4,000 pounds. I forgot that thing is a tank. He makes about 1,500 horsepower, and is basically it's a low RPM, which is like 6,000 RPM. So yes, that makes it tricky. What that is interesting though is obviously a lot of the guys are used to the Pontiac stuff, or also it's very comparable to some of the Dodge stuff. Surprisingly, generally they're lower RPM, but they make the horsepower just because of where they're flowing. Basically they just different route to get there. So it makes it a little more complicated because you're not using the RPM to work with you. When you're not using the RPM to work with you, you got to kind of go with you got to let the ratios do the work for you. So in this situation, he's going to be shifting, let's say about 6,000 RPM. Well, actually, just shift a little bit above that because that's obviously peak. So it'll probably shift about 6,400. But he's got enough horsepower we need to use in torque with that car. Being a power adder car, we can actually use the gear ratio with this to get more on the starting line or tire size or what we need to do to lower that launch RPM. So what we would probably do is try to launch this car down in the 4,000 RPM range. So we still have, say, a 2,000 to 2,500 RPM window to work with. And then we kind of use that as a tiptoe thing to get our clutch lock up where we want. There are some other things with that, which I can bring up, which a lot of guys are used to us dealing with the high horsepower, small tire stick cars. Obviously, the ones that go fast, it's, I hate to say it, I'll bring him up real quick, is our friend Garrett. Everybody knows him as Cletus. But the long story short is, I remember he made a comment, to me. He was like, wow, I never thought, it's less power to go quicker. It's a perfect example of you can only accelerate a tire, a certain size tire, certain contact patch so quickly before you overrun it. It doesn't matter what you do. It's like a Top Fuel, a funny car, for example, can't go up there with the clutch dead locked up and throw everything they got at it. They'll just do another burnout. Same thing applies. So what you would do in a car like this, yes, that 4,000 pounds is basically kind of like a tank, but at the same time, depending on your tire size, which he isn't like completely overtired, we just have to get wheel speed. So what we'll do is we'll use a power control along with gear ratios to get us that operating window we want to work in before we go into selecting exactly how we're going to tune the clutch. I do know he's recently built Rich a new clutch, which is a 6-lever next gen setup with custom, a lot of little special stuff, obviously being for the flywheel and the style he's doing. But I know exactly what that'll be. So that'll be everybody can kind of keep an eye on him through his adventures here coming up soon. We got another one by Sam Murray. What effect does different Rockwell and centered iron disc make? All right, this is going to be a fun one. I'm actually glad somebody asked this one. Basically, Rockwell is important and it's not important. I think I could tell you I've actually watched a batch of discs go to a 500-inch Pro Stock team who sent them all back because the Rockwell was 5 or 6 points different than what they wanted. The same company sent back the exact same disc, marked them a different Rockwell, and they loved them. They were great. The best way to put it, I'll give you guys an example. My own Pro Stock stuff, I've run a Rockwell in the 5191 style compound, let's say at 68 to 72, and then I've taken it and put some 58 to 62s in. Yeah, it changes my base counterweight setup a little bit. It's if you have somebody that tells you that one Rockwell just 100% won't work, I'm probably going to sound a little bit, I guess you say a little arrogant or whatever the right word might be. But the truth of the matter is they need to work a little bit on their tuning because it just means you need to change just a little bit. I sure as heck wouldn't throw a pile of clutch discs out the window just because the Rockwell is a little different. Now, that being said, the harder the Rockwell, obviously the harder the disc. The harder the disc is basically the less aggressive the disc. So that's why you say a 5135. But here's the funny thing about compounds. You can Rockwell a 5135 disc in the same range as Rockwell, theoretically, this is the same as a 5191. So they both could say Rockwell at 60. I'll just pull a number. So if you had a 5135 at 60 and a 5191 at 60, well, the 5135 is twice as aggressive as a 5191. But the Rockwell could be the same. So that's why I say sometimes you have to kind of take that a little bit with tit for tat. It's not exactly, yes, it does make a difference. And when we're getting into finite tuning, it makes a difference. But at the same time, it's not something that if you get a hold of a disc that is one extreme or the other, I'm not talking if you had a disc that's 70 and the other one is 40, 48. I mean, obviously that's a huge difference. You're talking 5, 6, 8 points. It's not enough to really go crazy about. So that all being said, it is something you need to look at. It's something to understand. But I think the one last point I would make, I've actually Rockwell tested discs. they will test different on each pad, and they will test different from the inside to the outside. I could probably put a disc in a Rockwell tester that's just been recently calibrated and get you 6 or 7 different numbers real easily off the same disc. So that being said, it's something else to look at. Let's see here. We got another one here came in. I'm assuming this is Justin Gallant. Let's see here from down in Florida. Okay, because of course Justin's got a turbo street car. Okay, let's see here. He's talking about with a 230. Okay, sorry, must not be talking about his, but turbo street car with a Linco 275 radial on a marginal track. Could you ever repeat it? Say in the heat, what clutch would you lean towards? Basically, there's a few things to look at there. The radial thing, and also the Linco, there's some different ways you can get away with it. There's some things you can do with the Linco that's a little differently than you can being a planetary style transmission. Most people, it depends on if it's air shifted or not. Air shifted allows you to have another little thing. And if you ever look on the side of the air pods, there's actually a place where you can screw in a little air bleed jet. So you can actually slow down how fast or quickly, or slower or quickly, however you say, that it actually shifts. The problem is you kind of start hurting clutch packs in those things a little bit if you do it too much. So what I would probably say in that type of a situation, your bigger thing there, the way to be the most consistent in A to B from track to track is going to be a larger diameter clutch rather than a smaller diameter with multiple discs. The more friction coefficient you can branch out on, the more consistency you'll have from tune-up to tune-up. It just kind of takes a little bit of that need for consistency of the rate of the so if the engine accelerates way quicker on a really crap track because it doesn't hook up, the counterweight's going to come in a lot quicker, which that smaller diameter multi-disc is going to be more complicated. So I would recommend, and obviously we'd have to look at several different factors. Would we be pro billet? Would it be like, say, one of our 11-inch, long style type adjustables, things like that. And a lot of that also comes down to how much a person wants to, how much they want to work on it. That's a big thing. So a lot of times you wouldn't believe, we've got one of our NA105 customers. He's basically been as quicker basically with a 10-inch next gen as he's been with a twin billet. The twin billet's going to go quicker, but it takes, an understanding that the overall tune-up changes, because now that the way that that you're obtaining it is the pressure and the friction coefficient has changed. So you have to tune with the gear ratios. Now that the gear ratios for him are getting a little closer to the ballpark, he's finding that that's getting a little bit easier too. But to go backwards, the other thing you would look at with with a radial car, a lot of times I kind of have mixed emotions with the radial stuff, because some of the radials technically are basically a glorified slick. They're just really heavy and got a really stiff sidewall. So what you kind of have to look at is it's not like it's not as different as everybody thinks when it comes to a clutch car. You can band-aid it a little bit with the suspension and the clutch and the gearing to kind of get where you need to go. What I would probably recommend in a situation like that would actually be looking at our gear ratio and everything to put the clutch tune where it needs to be to get our optimal window. The reason for that is so many of the guys, in years past that are running power adder, the turbo application type stuff, I should say, more than anything, they get a little too quick to go play on the laptop. They don't really want to do the mechanical stuff. So the easier way to do it is kill power on the starting line. Well, that's not really necessarily the right way to do it. Sometimes you'll find that lowering the launch RPM but keeping the power, is better. A lot of times what I'll teach is something along the lines of, basically leave the power where it is, but use your launch RPM to do what you need to do. Don't always just try to get more power by saying, hey, I'm going to throw more boost at it. The best way to do it is to drive into it. Basically allow that power to do the same thing and know what you have to do. You can only accelerate that car so quickly. So it's the same thing as like going back, like I said, a top fuel car, for example. They're basically using the clutch they know we can't use 8,000, 10,000, or 100,000 horsepower, whatever their calculators have gone up to these days. But basically, they know they can't put all that down. So they're slipping it. They say, I can put X amount of percentage down over at this amount of rate of wheels or of ground speed. So that's how they're going to tune it. They're going to stage that clutch in with those levers by bringing more and more clutch pressure in, which by bringing more and more clutch pressure in is doing nothing more than bringing more and more actual power in. So you're doing the same thing if you're looking at something like that. So it's going to be a high horsepower radial thing. And you got to look at the other thing to get into that. You'd have to look, am I running a 3-speed, 4-speed, 5-speed? Am I running a pro billet style clutch? Am I running a long style clutch? Obviously, with the next 275, I'm probably going to have a billet in that pretty obviously. But there's going to be several different options in there to look at. So that's one good point. Basically, and by the way, Jeff Owen out there down there at Timo Motorsports. Go take a bathroom break. Don't tie it in a knot. See you back here in a few. But basically, at the end of the day, this all goes back to consistency. And that's why you guys, I think everybody that calls and talks to me or talks to Tinsley knows we're going to take everything that you guys have got into consideration. We don't just want to sell you a clutch. That's why you won't get on our website and say, how much horsepower do I make? Give you, have a form that basically tells you exactly what to buy and buy it here now. We're not going to do that. Reason I don't do that is that's, to me, it doesn't take that much longer to get your information, have a 15, 30-minute conversation with you and build it specifically to what it needs to be. It's kind of one of those things where I think in the industry we're in right now, obviously everybody knows in the current, I thought I was going to get by this whole entire podcast without, mentioning everybody being isolated right now. But, the current pandemic is, let's face it, all it's doing is elevating our ability to want things now even quicker, bring it to me. They don't want to even wait. But at the same time, anything that's worth waiting for, is probably a little bit better. So, it's kind of a thing where it takes a little longer sometimes to do that, but it's also going to save you money in the long run. It's very important to me to build things specifically off of what the customer needs, not just do it that way. So, like I say, there's a lot of different things that you have to take into consideration with doing this stuff. I encourage questions all the time. Everybody knows if I don't get back to you quickly, just know it's not because of a lack of effort, just from usually I'm tied up. But we do it as much as we can. We've got our build sheets and information, whether it be a rebuild sheet or a build sheet. More information people can give me, whenever they email us, call us, messages, however. It's basically, we're going to go through everything, because it's not just about how much horsepower you make. It's not just about what the car weighs. We're going to get into everything, and it doesn't take that long. And we're going to look into what you guys want to do, what your expectations are. But it's basically tuning these things as a whole. So if I want everybody to take away something from this, what I really wanted to take away from is we're going to as we keep going with these, with our podcast, we're actually going to take a lot of time here to explain each individual thing. We'll start breaking down how certain clutch designs. We'll start breaking down different options as it comes to shocks, as it comes to the way the suspension works. We'll get into four-link and ladder bar tuning. We'll get into gear ratios, and we'll spend time digging into the different transmission manufacturers, whether it be something as simple as a reworked T56 Magnum type setup, from Liberty or G-Force or something like that, or RPM, or some of the others. Or we're going to look at, obviously, we'll get into the G-Force, the 101As, the GF5Rs, GF2000s, and all the Liberty offerings, whether it be something as simple as an equalizer, an extreme, to some of their little bit more interesting, elaborate stuff. And we'll even work into Linko and the planetary stuff, which everybody knows I'm a mountain motor guy. I love my Linkos, just because it's kind of where I was born and raised. They're a lot of fun. They're a little quicker and faster, in my opinion, to switch between rounds. But that being said, what I want everybody to take away is every part of this is we're dealing with friction coefficient over applied pressure, or vice versa. And it's all a balance. And anything you do in the gear ratios and the suspension and the tire size, that all will affect your window. So if you've got a clutch and you say, man, this thing, I got a ton of base and a ton of counterweight in it, and just to get it to hold, or vice versa, can't get enough out of it. You can't get where you need to be. A lot of times it's actually something further behind. And a great thing to look at is, it's interesting, is basically looking at like a class like everybody's familiar with in the stick shift world is Coyote stock and NMRA. We got, some of our customers over there that do, fabulous, especially, the ones that are not using the clutch shamer. And everybody's kind of like, well, how do they do it? And they think so many of them think the car is so much about the clutch. Believe it or not, because they're limited to a non-adjustable diaphragm clutch, it costs these guys more money. They'd save money having, an adjustable clutch. They wouldn't have to pull the thing out but once a year. They'd save money longer, and the cars would go quicker and more consistent. But that being said, it puts a spotlight on the rest of the car. Those cars are all about suspension, weight transfer, and things like that. If that stuff's wrong, the clutch isn't going to be right. You literally cannot, you're not going to be able to pull the clutch out every round, pulling the transmission, everything to make those changes. So that's the whole point. The best way to look at it is everything behind the clutch has to be working in unison with the clutch, or everything won't go right. So basically, that's really the biggest thing. And we're probably going to be, close to wrapping up here shortly. But at the end of the day, if there's any other questions or anything that anybody wants to ask, we're more than happy to take them at any given time, and we'll continue doing our podcast, and go from there. I do want to take a second right now that I saw that we have somebody on our asking or on our live feed right now that I got to give a big shout out to. This is going to be a slightly personal situation, but the most people know, like say in my accident, like say be an anniversary in 2 days, be 5 years. I was paralyzed completely, nipples down, and like say pretty much made Tinsy become my nurse, my caretaker, and my primary business person. But luckily, I'm back on my feet and kind of doing what I can now. But we had a special nurse down there in Miami, and her name's Nita. And like I said, actually had her, I think it was her nephew, Eric, as well, for a little bit when I was in a step down. But I had her in rehab. And I'll just say it this way, for all you people, I definitely gave her a few shitty situations. And she was a really good teacher and taught me a lot and very caring. And I'd say I'm very glad to have a lot of those people on board, because we wouldn't be here today doing what we're doing if it wasn't for the awesome people down at Jackson Memorial and at the Miami Project, Dr. Green, and the family I got to give a shout out to is by far Daryl Gwynn, Jerry Gwynn, and Joan Gwynn. Which had I not been obviously wrecked within 60 miles of the best place in the world to have that, probably been worse. But I can't thank them enough for everything they've done. So basically, with that all being said, we're probably going to be close to taking a wrap here. And like I say, I want to encourage everybody. What we're also going to do is I'm going to have a link up very shortly. You guys can watch for it. And what we're going to have is let everybody submit their race packs, their data logs of different types for the following sessions ahead of time, and we will get them on the phone, work with you guys one-on-one, so you can actually work through your information together, so that everybody can kind of learn as a whole. I feel that's very important to do, and we'll continue doing that. So keep an eye open for for that to come out here, and we'll be ready to take your questions and field all that and get more in depth as we keep going. So for first time out, I hope everybody has had a good time, and we'll continue going here. But in future, we're going to be ready to go, and we look forward to seeing all you guys here soon. Like I say, pop in anytime, fire us over at blackmagicclutches.com, and we'll see you soon.